Welcome. My name is Kat Zagaria Buckley, and I'm the Director of Art Exhibitions and Outreach here at the University of Southern Maine. I'm so excited tonight for a conversation with the 2023 University Artist in Residence, Veronica and Perez. I'd like to thank this lecture's sponsors, which include the Warren Foundation, the University of Southern Maine Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Council, the university's Center for Collaboration and Development, and the university's Women and Gender Studies Department, as well as the Maine Humanities Council and the Maine Arts Commission. And especially thank you to you, our audience, who are here joining us tonight. Our conversation this evening will go about 45 minutes, and we'll have time for questions and answers afterwards. So to begin, I'd like to introduce Veronica, who is a multidisciplinary artist living here in Maine. They utilize synthetic hair, discarded objects, and other unconventional materials, such as sugar and construction remnants in their sculptural works to conceal and reveal hidden and forgotten parts of one's identity. Perez creates intense personal moments by means of material hybridization and challenging ideals of beauty. Their chosen material aims to comment on contemporary Latinx and feminist issues, which they explore through notions of loss, time, and trauma. In 2020, they were awarded the Ellis Beauregard Fellowship in the Visual Arts, and in 2021, they began their residency at the David C. Driscoll Black Seed Studio Fellowship in Portland. They were one of the inaugural Lunder Institute for American Art Fellows at the Colby Museum of Art. In 2022, Perez presented their first solo exhibition at the Center for Maine Contemporary Arts in Rockland. So thank you so much for being here tonight, Veronica. I'm going to note that I am going to use my phone because my watch broke earlier today to just keep time. So to begin, I'd just love to talk about your practice. And can we explore the connection you're examining in unconventional media, particularly through materials such as sugar and hair?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with sugar, I guess. And in this work right here, Historical Silencing, which is a piece that I did. It was an ephemeral outdoor piece that I did for Space's Recite program, which was taking a part of history in Portland, Maine, and kind of like reimagining it in a different way. And so we were all given pieces of history from Maine to work with. When I received all of my stories, I realized that there was no Latinx representation. And so I worked with a historian at Bowdoin to kind of suss out and find some Latinx representation in Portland, Maine. It turns out that there were a lot of trades that took place between Portland and the West Indies, specifically with regards to molasses, rum, and sugar. And so I kind of honed in on that history of sugar because sugar has a rich and kind of really terrible history. And so sugar was the one thing that I focused on. And so for this piece, I was using sugar in a way to almost represent the body. Let me give you a little rundown on what this piece is. So this piece is a pile of sugar arms inside of a caged-in area. Inside of the sugar is hair as well. And so when I set it up on the East End beach, and so when the tide came in, the sugar would be washed away, and the only remnants that would be there is hair. So I kind of used that as a metaphor and the story that was found as a way to comment on silencing and resiliency. Resiliency, I have like kind of a weird relationship with, but we'll get back to that. So as far as like the material of sugar, it was a historical reference to something that had happened, but it also metaphorically lent itself to do what I needed to do for people to understand where I was coming from. And so when there's a close-up of the sugar in the hands, I used a traditional Mexican sugar skull recipe to make these. And so, yeah, I think another reason I really gravitate towards sugar and hair is because these materials are really accessible. You can find sugar at the grocery store and you can find hair at the beauty salon, where I get it at Sally's. And so it's a really accessible material for me because when I was in school and in grad school, even though I do have a background in metals, working in metals, a lot of those places were really closed off unless you had a specialized degree or something like that. So I couldn't really access different ways to make the things I wanted to make. And with the usual art materials, I couldn't express the things I wanted to express. So instead, I used sugar and hair to kind of further this conversation that I wanted to have in a more, I don't want to say tactile way, but in a way that lent itself to kind of become more human. Because I think that's specifically with hair, I think that's why I gravitate towards that, is because it is kind of a stand-in for me as like a human form. So.
Yeah, that's so interesting to think about traditional artistic media as sort of being separated from us. We see them, I don't know, almost at an arm's length from an accessibility standpoint, both in terms of cost, but in terms of like when you encounter art.
Yeah, for sure. And this is not to diss anybody that, works in this way, because there's a ton of talented people out there that can't do the things that I can do. But with regards to the material choices, I'm really drawn to materials kind of like from that arte povera, and materials that really, really resonate within your body. So, yeah.
Thank you. So part of your materials that you talked about a bit is thinking about history as you move forward. So history plays a large role in your practice as you grapple with concepts from active erasure, which deliberately obscures histories, to potential histories, which calls on us to recognize alternative anti-imperialist heritage within our past, which our past offers to our present. Simultaneously, your work is firmly rooted in the present through its interaction with the community. So I'd love to hear more about the present-past connection in your work and how your pieces bridge the two into a cohesive whole. As you answer, I'm just going to double check that our friends on Zoom, that everything's okay for them.
That sounds good. I'm going to think about this for a second. So when I'm working with history, a lot of the time, I use a lot of the histories of my father. Short little bio on my dad. He came here from Puerto Rico when he was 7, lived in the Bronx. And so he never really had a chance to like be the person that he wanted to be. He was drafted into the army when he was 17. He passed away when he was 60. And so his life was always spent doing something for others instead of like being the person that he wanted to be. Well, I say all this because when I'm working with the past, the present, and the future, which we'll get to, I'm always thinking of my dad in these positions. And so I think I'm pulling and gleaning from different parts of his life to kind of still talk about the cultural issues that are facing specifically Latinx people today. There was another part of that question I wanted to answer, and I can't remember everything, so I have it on my phone. So please excuse me. And so from another historical standpoint, I think we're going to talk later about radical imagination, so I don't really want to bring it up right now. But what I do want to bring up is that I feel that referencing all these different points in time, let me start that again. I feel that I'm referencing all these different points in time because I don't have a clear picture of what my dad's life was. There's hardly any photos. There's hardly any writings or anything that he did. So it's kind of left up to me to kind of figure out and put the pieces together of his life through what I have of his, which is very little, to kind of create these things or these totems like for him. I think I can explain it better if I show a couple of pieces. So in some of these works, I'm using hair and I'm using fencing. And there was a photo that I should have included here, but it's like one of the photos that I have of my father. And he has this really cute little hairstyle. He must be 5 or 6 years. No, he must be oh, this must be in Puerto Rico. He must be 5 or 6 years old. He's swinging in a swing. There's fencing behind him. There's concrete on the ground. And so I'm trying to pull all of these symbols out of the photograph to kind of cobble together this history of my father. So I feel like when I talk about the past, present, and future, I'm thinking of this, what is it, a multiverse where everything is simultaneously happening together. And I feel like that's what's happening with the work. I'm gleaning from all the past, present, and the future. I could be starting at Z. I could be, starting all over the place, but it kind of solidifies itself in these abstract sculptures that I make. So when working with history or working with, the past, the present, I feel like it's really important to not say this happened in 1977, this happened there. I don't really know when it happened. And so I'm just gleaning from time. So it could be a little confusing, but I feel like it kind of crystallizes all in the work as one homogeneous object.
Mm-hmm. I feel like it's almost like a sculptural collage that gets us closer to the truth that we have to create for ourselves, mm-hmm. because some moments of history are unknowable, and that's okay.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, for sure.
I also have noticed that oral history plays a really important role in your work. And I wanted to ask you what's important to you about oral history, and how can its incorporation into visual art strengthen what you're examining?
So I just started getting into oral history, and I'll give you a little background of what it is, or how I utilize it. About 2 years ago, I started these braiding circles, which I'm doing here at USM as well. And what they are is we're working with materials, usually hair or other textiles, to bring out somatic memories that you might have surrounding hair and identity. And through that working with the hair, I ask people to tell me stories about their lives with, hair. And so through getting these stories from people at these braiding circles, I found a way to kind of deepen the meaning of the artwork, not deepen the meaning of the artwork, but make the artwork more personal. And I feel like it's really important because a lot of these histories haven't been captured before. I'm mainly focusing on Black, Indigenous, Asian, and Latinx people. And through these stories, through the gleaning of these stories, I am attempting to make an archive of a different story. And, we hear the same stories all of the time. And I feel that when I use oral histories, I'm kind of tapping into, a space that I can't access. I don't have these stories myself. And so I feel like it rounds out the artwork a little bit better when I'm using these oral stories. And I mean, oral history is really important. I don't just do it for posterity's sake. I do it so that people can know that they have a voice and they can contribute to the larger story that's being told about themselves and their lives. And there's not the same story over and over again. So these personal stories are really, really important to me, to the person that's giving them, and to the artwork itself as well. And I mean, what better way to learn about something or to hear something than the actual person telling you what is going on? There's something really special and intimate when somebody shares a story with me. And it's a really deep and moving moment when they decide to give that to me, because that's big. I can't put a price tag on the importance of oral stories in my work, but it does deepen the artwork, but I think it also deepens the understanding that's surrounding the artwork as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking about your earlier answer too, where you said you were inspired materially by the Arte Povera movement. And I'm just thinking about how bringing in stories really adds this other element to this tapestry almost that you're creating through all of these different multiple facets, from maybe different sculptural elements, but also the incorporation of recordings and whatnot as well.
Yeah, I saw, I'm going to mispronounce their name, and I'm so sorry. Firelli Baez. They're a sculptor. They're I believe Haitian. And if I'm getting that wrong, I apologize. But I went to their show at the ICA Watershed in Boston, and they made this beautiful arch that looked like it was like a castle underwater almost. And inside it had all of these people talking about stories about the Boston Harbor, about how they worked there, about how they, labored there, and their labor was unseen. And I found that like really striking, because not only did I have this beautiful visual piece to look at, but I was transported somewhere else when I heard those stories being told. And it just like, I could like feel it in my body and see it in my mind. And I think that's what oral history is. It helps to give you a fuller and more truthful picture of like what is happening, instead of like someone said, well, this thing happened right here. And it's like, well, I was standing over there and I saw something totally different. You know what I mean? And so kind of giving these different perspectives on different pieces of history, because people experience things differently all of the time.
Mm-hmm. And it's also striking that I feel like your work sometimes makes this unseen labor visible, just through monumentality. I mean, it's not always easy to get an idea of scale, but some of Veronica's sculptures are extremely, extremely large. You can go on and respond.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like this piece is called Cacophonous Ancestral Apparition. And when I was making it, I was thinking of the braids coming together as like a cacophony of voices, like building this sculpture to radically imagine a new future. And I'm going to be using radical imagination for the rest of my life. But because it just fits so well. I digress. But I think that's what I'm visualizing in my head. Like the braids are stories that are being woven together to create this kind of abstract notion of what has happened in the past, what's happening now, and what could happen in the future. And I think that's a lot, but I also think that it kind of lends itself to being understood in a different way. And I think you're going to ask me a question. I know you're going to ask me a question about feeling the work in galleries and stuff like that. So I don't want to get into that just yet. So
it's also interesting because I've seen when you invite others to braid with you, sometimes you say specifically, I want a 3-strand braid. Mm-hmm. And I feel like your answer about it, past, present, and future being interwoven, I'm like, oh, I see it. I see the 3 strands coming together in this way.
Yeah, it's such like an innocuous thing, like the braid. But I mean, you hear Indigenous people talking about it. You hear Black people talking about it. You hear Latinx people talking about how important the braid is, because it does signify, I mean, there's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The things come in threes. You always think about these things in threes. And so I think that breaking down the different symbols of a braid kinds of lends itself to using this really powerful ancestral language that I'm kind of tapping into. So
that's so awesome. Okay, so visual art often lacks intersensory components, but your art, as we've just discussed, does not. Your work is visual, tactile, somatic, and auditory. Not only are you as an artist taking an interdisciplinary approach to creating your work, but audiences need to take an interdisciplinary approach to when viewing your work. Mm-hmm. So how do you feel that the multisensorial processing that you ask the audience to engage in affects their experience of your pieces?
So and this is not a diss to you, it's so funny because I'm never asking people to do anything when they come into the museum or they come into the gallery or they come into a place where they're looking at my work. I want them to feel and do the things that makes them feel good. And so I think that's why I don't make the work. I'm going to say this and be like, you're lying. I'm having a conversation with myself in my head. It's like, I want people experience things in different ways. And so when you walk into a museum, if you're more drawn to something that's auditory, you're going to go to auditory. If you're more drawn to something that's tactile, you're going to something that's tactile. And so I feel like by incorporating all of these elements, there's something for everybody to enjoy. But at the same time, I don't think I expect people to kind of feel, I mean, I was going to say not feel everything all at once, but like, that's me. Like I'm feeling every emotion all of the time. which is probably why I make the work the way that I do. I think what I'm trying to say is I want to make the show accessible for people. And if they glom onto one part of it, that's great. If they glom onto the whole thing, amazing. But I want people to come in and almost have like, not a spiritual experience, but I want them to feel something when they're in the space with the works, kind of like how I felt when I was looking at the Baez piece at the ICA. So, yeah.
It's interesting. There's so many, it's like you're talking about an audience member, maybe who's coming into the space having multiple avenues to approach your work through.
Yeah.
Which also there are multiple avenues just in general in your practice for a community member to come in and be a part of a workshop or, maybe submit a story. At the show I saw at the CMCA, we even had Braille labels, which is something I'm keen to incorporate. So you're really providing so many different avenues for individuals to experience your work.
I think that comes from, I was lucky enough to be a social worker for about 7 years, and I worked with people with neurodivergencies and disabilities. And I think that part of it stuck with me is that I could have conversations with people without using words. I could have an emotional experience with someone, or love someone without touching them. And there's so many different ways to experience this world that I wanted to make sure that whoever stepped into the museum or the gallery or the place that the show was at would be able to have some kind of experience in there. I think it sounds more overly didactic in my head, but I'm not like writing too many things. I'm really relying on like sight, sense, touch, and what's the other one? Hearing. I'm really kind of relying on all of those to get, I don't want to say my point across, but to get the idea of the artwork to the viewer.
I was wondering, when did you sort of make the leap in your practice from working as an individual artist to inviting the community to collaborate with you on pieces?
Yeah, so I had always really wanted to work. I think that's why I became a social worker, because I always wanted to be a community artist. I love working with the community. I love working with humans. And I just think that, there we go. I made the leap when I was actually at Colby College 2 years ago at this point now. I really got to spend there and invest some time with the students in the community there. And I realized in that time that I could hold these workshops and make art about the same things that I wanted to make art about, because people were experiencing the same things that I was experiencing, and it just deepened the work. The jump to community was hard because you don't want to exploit people. I don't want to just use people for my work and be like, this is mine. I want the community to feel like they have an involvement in it as well. And so I had to like really take my time and figure out how to do that. I was working in my studio like for so long before that, just like as an independent artist. And I wasn't really getting to the core of what I wanted to say. But I am now, because I feel like I have all of these other voices supporting me in saying the things that need to be said. And the community just strengthened that like overall. So
yeah, it's like almost like a chorus, just like working together.
Yeah, it's a really nice place to be.
And social practice can be so tricky for everything that you just mentioned, because there are so many lines about, what is the community getting out of the work? But I feel like your work, you provide a space for people who need it to engage in somatic processing.
Yeah. And I felt like that was so corny. Like for a long time, I was like, this is so corny. Like, why am I doing this? Like, nobody's going to get anything from this. But then I would have people come up to me and say like, thank you for letting me tell that story about my mother. Thank you for letting me share that story about this. People want to talk about these things. And I found that in those spaces, in those intimate spaces, people were opening up and sharing parts of themselves with me that they needed to at that point. So
I was also wondering about how you approach the concept of authorship in these more collaborative situations. We talked about how your practice has sort of transitioned a bit from working as an individual to working with community members. So how do you think about that collaboration and authorship in these pieces that took literally so many hands to come together, but stories and other forms of labor as well?
Yeah, I'm going to answer. I wanted to continue the answer I was doing before. No. I thought about it while you were talking, but I'm just going to go back to the previous question that Kat asked about working with communities and how I'm not exploiting people or doing this. I also work with a group called Tender Table. It is a space for Black and Brown people to share storytelling and food, which is really great. And through that group, we do a lot of mutual aid. So one part in my practice that I'm really passionate about is being able to pay the people that are involved in this. That's like really important to me. They're sharing parts of their lives. They're giving me labor of themselves. And so it's really important to me that these organizations are compensated and the people that are sharing the story are compensated. Money is weird. Capitalism is weird, but at least I can get something in the hands of people that they might need. And, money is weird, but whatever. I just don't want people to feel exploited. And I want people to be, I feel very blessed that they are sharing these things with me and spending their time with me. That's like, who wants to do that, you know? And then to your question about authorship as well. I was thinking about this because I've been thinking about this for a while, because I was thinking about this during the CMCA show, because as you see in the photos behind me, there's like a lot of people. This was kind of like a different class, but there's a lot of people like helping me do these things. And so like, I think I like to talk about authorship in a way where I had this weird captain of the ship analogy, and I was like, don't use that. And now that's the only thing I can think of, but I'm not going to use it. So don't worry. But the way that I like to think about it, or the way that I approach it in my work, is like, I'm kind of like the project manager, and we're not even project manager. We're all working together to create this one goal. And so not only do I pay people on my work, but I also make sure that they get the recognition in like brochures, in like artist statements, in wall labels and stuff like that. So I don't want them to feel like, thanks for the braids, I'll see you later. It's more of like, hey, thanks for the braids. What's your name? Because you are a part of this artwork as much as I'm a part of this artwork. I'm just the one that's building the structure after the fact with your voice and your braids.
There's an excellent book called Wages for Work. If maybe you've read it, it's about social practice and art. And just everything you said is like, it's like that book distilled. So I would like to know a bit more about how you became interested in somatic processing. What does it mean to you, and how do you think art can facilitate it?
I think about this in the context of my braiding circles, and I feel like when you're working with these hair materials and you're touching something, it can like bring up these past memories. But even further than that, the labor and the actual like movement of the braid and the movement of your body and the talking about things, I feel like releases a lot of trauma. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist, but I do have resources if you need it. But I feel like that releases a lot of trauma for people. So when you're able to like talk about things, when you're able to make something, I mean, art therapy, amazing. You're able to process these things differently when you can like move your body and feel things within your body. And so I think I use somatic processing in a couple of different ways, but I think one of the main ways is when people are actually like touching the material. Like I like to equate it to like you smell something and it like instantly brings you back to a memory that you had when you touch hair. Like for me, it brings back lots of memories for me. And so when I feel like you're in these situations and something happens and you're instantly drawn back to it, I feel like that is a good way to start to process things that have happened. Yeah.
Yeah, I see so many artists are interested in somatic processing and movement and play in their work right now. I think it's a really sort of fertile avenue that is just so exciting from my perspective.
Yeah.
And then it also allows us to bring in like somatic movement therapists and play theorists into our work, which is, yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking about play a lot right now, which is really funny because I don't think it has anything to do with the work. I think it has to do with the fact that I have a 4-year-old and, seeing her interact with the works so closely. Like I brought these little rugs up because she would use them as like rugs for like her babies. And I don't know, there's just something about her playing with the materials and then seeing an older person do the same thing, not make a tea set or a tea party, but their first instinct is to want to touch and hug it. I feel like I think that's really something special when you want to like go and like hug a sculpture. People want to hug this one all the time. Where is it? They want to hug that one all the time. It's like probably my height up here. Boop. And I feel like that goes back into not just play, but then again about touch, about somatic processing, about being able to feel things in a different way than just kind of like looking at something. So
I worked at a museum once and we had a 4-year-old hug a Cy Twombly sculpture.
I love that.
It's the best incident report I ever got to file.
I have to tell this story. I have to tell you guys this story. So when I went to the Venice Biennale a couple of years ago when, oh my God, what was her name? Now I'm going to forget her name. Either way, there were these busts of like a woman's like bottom of their torso and they were nude. Fine. She had cigarettes like sticking out of different like orifices and stuff like that. And so there was one sticking out of a butt. A kid walked up and pulled the cigarette out. I'd never laughed so hard in my entire life. And then the docent just came up and was like, with a new cigarette. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. So he really wanted to touch it. Like, I was like, I want to touch it too, but I think I know a little better, but good on you, kid. Sorry, I had to share that. It's so funny.
It's absolutely perfectly done to my next question, which is, how do you ensure your work retains the hallmark of community somatic activity once it is on semi-stagnant display in a gallery space?
Touch it. I love when people touch my work because it is so, there's an aspect of it that's really luscious and it draws you in and makes you want to touch it. And so like touch away, because I think that, again, I'm going back to the somatic processing. When we touch and we feel things, we kind of think about things in a different way when we're able to kind of like do that. And I always try to break down barriers in museums or gallery settings because I don't want people to walk in and feel so like I can't do anything. I want people to come in and like enjoy themselves. And I want people to leave with something different than they might expect. Always trying to do the unexpected,
I feel like it goes back to sort of clearing the gallery space and how important it is, because museums, we all know, are problematic institutions. So the more we can kind of mix it up and allow them to take on different or alternate ways of creating meaning.
It goes back to accessibility too, of allowing people that are vision impaired to touch the paintings, or allowing people that can't hear to have like that visual language there for them. So it's not only about like a different way to experience it, it's about accessibility too.
Yeah. We're at maybe, I think it's my final question. Is it? It is. Yeah. My radical imagination question. I often think of radical imagination's role in approaching institutions, exhibitions, and art. Radical imagination theory posits that we imagine institutions, that we can imagine institutions not as they are, but as they might be, and then rescue that theoretical potential future and implement it right now in our present. So I was wondering if you feel that radical imagination has a place in your practice, and if so, how?
Yes.
And
thank you. No, I think it does. Like I was talking earlier about the histories of my father. And I won't talk about that, but I will talk about this book that I'm reading called Latinx. And it kind of talks about the history of the word Latinx. Somebody in the book talked about how it's a very futuristic word and how, like, if you can see yourself in the future, then you exist. and kind of using that as a framework to say, like, people are here, we exist, and we exist in the future, so we can make this change. I feel like I do work a lot with the radical imagination, even though I didn't know what it was until you told me, because I am working from this really ambiguous space of using the past and the present. And I think the future to kind of think about these things like colonialism, imperialism, gentrification, and talk about them, but also at the same time, bring them into the present, and at the same time, give some kind of resolution to what the new futures could be. And I think I say this with thinking about my father again, because, like I said, he didn't really get to live the life he wanted to live. He, came here, he got into the Army, he had 4 kids, and then he got cancer and died. And I feel like that is 60 years is a really short amount of time to be here on this earth and do the things that you want to do. And so I think that when I'm thinking about the radical imagination, I'm thinking about the lives that he could have had and that he could have led. And that's like the futuristic portion of it. But using the past and the present to get to that point. And so I think that just imagining Black, Indigenous, Asian, Latinx people in the future is really important. And it shows us that we still exist. So
that's so powerful of a place to sort of wrap things up on. I do want to talk more about your project with the university.
Yes.
About braiding circles and whatnot. So I just want to give you an open space to do that. Yeah,
sure. So I am co-teaching a class with Helen Stringfellow. I don't know if any of the students are here.
Hi.
Which is a really great class, right? It's fun. Yeah, we had fun. And so basically in the classes, what we're doing is Helen's teaching on Tuesdays. I'm teaching on Thursdays. In the Thursday classes, I'm going through some of my processes more in detail and showing the students how I use it in my work. We've went through community art. We've went through oral histories. And now we're moving on to fabrication. So the class kind of distills different parts of my practice and then gives it to the students in these really little cohesive ways that hopefully they can see and then maybe bring some of it into their practice. As far as the braiding circles, I've already had a couple. I've had a couple do people know what Spindleworks is and the art department? Those 2 places are art centers for people with disabilities and neurodivergencies. Me and Andrea were just there today at the art department. And so at these spaces and at these braiding circles, we were just making hair and braiding and weaving and stuff like that. And there's more upcoming braiding circles next week, and even planning more with my support, Andrea, with the Indigenous Students Alliance, the Latinx Student Alliance. And I'm really excited to work with these students on campus because I think that's what made the project so robust last year, is the people that were willing to share the stories with me. And it was mostly students that shared a lot of the stories with me. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, so that's what I'm doing at USM. And then there'll be an exhibition in May at the gallery.
Yeah, at the art gallery. Everybody, please come to the art gallery. Those on Zoomland also, always come. We do have a few braiding circles coming up too. Mm-hmm. One is going to be on the 15th, February 15th at 6 p.m. at the art gallery. And the second one is on the 16th in the Diversity Center here on our Portland campus. For those who are here in person, I do have flyers. Those on Zoomland. Check the art gallery website. I think we can give it over for questions.
Yes.
I'm not entirely sure if the people on Zoom can hear the audience. So if you have a question, ask it, and we're going to try and repeat it so that they can hear it through the mic. I will also check Zoom if anyone out there has a question. But let's start in person. Thoughts?
Comments? Concerns?
We did a perfect talk and we have no questions.
I know. I just can't believe it.
A comment. I was just thinking of how you brought all the voices together to synthesize them. And you know, I think you've just done such a great job at just like, you know, so many people carry around stories and they don't really always talk about them. And then all of a sudden, you know, I think we've all had this happen to us where all of a sudden you're talking to somebody about something maybe horrible, maybe great, but this other person goes, that happened to me too. And it's like, whoa, it's like an instant bond.
I was just thinking that too. Yes.
And I think that's what you were describing.
Mhm.
And it made me think of that. I
Yeah.
think that's a beautiful thing that you're giving to the people contributing. Like you say, money is weird, but that's okay. If you need to do that, that's fine. But you're giving them a huge gift just in that connection
Yeah.
with other people,
hmm
knowing that other people have this happen to them too.
Yeah. There's like you said, there's bonds created in that, and there's humanity and empathy and sympathy created in that too. And I feel that that brings us back to being human and realizing that we're all in this together, you know? And so I like people. I like being around people. I like when people interact with each other. Thank you for your comment. I really appreciate it because I really don't ever think about the outcomes of it. And I always think it's really silly and frivolous and stupid. But when somebody says something like that, it kind of grounds me back into these really raw human emotions that are important to us. So thank you.
And just to kind of follow up on that, excuse me, as someone who's actually attended one of the braiding circles, it really is, it's amazing the bonding that starts with one story and then another story and another story. And for us, we actually continued a whole conversation that lasted, you know, on and off for weeks with different people, just, you know, as a result of this.
That's amazing. I love how that like reverberated into the world. And yeah, it makes me feel like they are working in a different way than I expected them to. So thank you. And people also, when they're in those positions, I always feel like people aren't going to share, but when you're around people that are sharing and you kind of feel some kind of kinship with them, not like a forced share, but it's more of like, hey, I feel that way too. You know what I mean? And I think that that's like, I was going back to yours about being empathetic and being sympathetic and just connecting on those really base human levels. So thank you.
Anyone else?
It doesn't have to be about art either. No.
Did you say all the hair that you work?
Yes, all the hair I work with is synthetic.
I just wondered if you could talk about that choice and maybe a little bit about like hair as a commodity and like where, like you said, you buy it sandwich. Just a little bit more about your thoughts about like where you acquire that hair and what you choose to do.
Sure, yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
What happened?
Can you repeat the question?
I can't remember the question.
It's about your choice of working with synthetic hair and hair as a commodity and how you navigate that as an artist.
Thank you. I already had the answer in my head, so I couldn't remember the question. But I read this book a while ago called, I think it was called Entanglement by Emma Tarlow. And she talked about how like sus the hair trade was and how women are just basically used as slaves to just grow hair in hair farms. And so I definitely don't want to use human hair. And it's also, and this isn't like the reason, but it's also really expensive. Like human hair bundles can cost like at least $80, $90. And so it also comes from like an economical standpoint as well. I use artificial hair, which I'm okay with because it looks like real hair. And when people put on synthetic wigs or they put on extensions or something like that, that is their hair. And so I feel really good about the choices that I'm making to use synthetic hair, knowing what I know about like the human hair trade. Did that answer your question? I feel like you had another question as well.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So I just wanted to offer a little appreciation too, in a sense. You kind of came for the hair tonight, but I really love that you started sugar And I'm a historian, and I remember being a kid studying children's history and kind of thinking about spices playing such a role in colonization of this new world. But sugar is really, I love the way you braid it together, just because sugar cannot be separated from the history of race and enslavement. And the way in class, I usually try to convey that is after 7 years war between England and France. And as a gesture of conciliation, the English offered the French a choice between all of Canada or the tiny sugar island of Guadeloupe. And the French opted to hold on to Guadeloupe. But more than that, when you're talking about the history of capitalism, like sugar was really at the heart of the birth of modern capitalism. And I think the element that you bring together there is just the invisibility of the production of sugar that was produced and exchanged around the world. And one abolitionist in the 19th century was kind of writing about that in an essay called The Emancipation of the West Indies, that I kind of think would be an epigraph on your show. As a white abolitionist, but he wrote that the sugar that they created was excellent and sweet, and nobody remembered to taste the blood in it. And because the production of sugar becomes divorced and separated from the people who are producing it. And so I just think the first piece that you showed, in the sense that a commodity that's produced and produces so much substance that can, within a cage and wrapped in hair, but that can be washed away and made invisible, is so powerful. And I don't want people to think of kind of like a quirky relationship that Portland has with like the triangle trade, these concepts you get introduced to in fifth grade, but like don't really convey the scale of what that meant and the way your work does. And so I just kind of, I hate being more of a comment than a question guy, but
we can comment, we can go back and forth. That's fine.
It's just so we'll make those things together.
Yeah. And I just actually got done. I'm very late on reading 1619 Project, and I just got to the chapter on sugar today. And I was like, where was this when I was doing this? I mean, it was here. I just didn't read it. But, people don't account for the blood that was spilled and the lives that were lost, all for this cash crop that they were making. And so I think I'm really happy that you glommed onto it in that way, because it's not like, ooh, look, this artist used sugar. It's like, no, I use sugar for a very specific reason that I use sugar. I used it because it was this commodity, and a lot of people died when they were trading it. And a lot of people were left out of the history books too. So who actually did the work to make all these white men money? So
you have the video on your website as well, right? Of that.
I do have the video on my website. There's a video. There's a video on my website if people want to see it, of the sugar dissolving into the ocean. And I mean, that ties back in with resiliency, which I also have an issue with, because the reason that, from a Puerto Rican standpoint, the reason that people in Puerto Rico have to be resilient is because of U.S. imperialism. And so it's like, bro, like, why are you calling us resilient when you're the ones like smacking us in the face? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. And so I'm hoping that all of that history is contained within that material, and it's not just like a kitschy choice or something like that. So it's a good comment, Guy.
I just find the aspect of storytelling and just kind of giving people who have been silenced for so long that platform for telling their own stories really interesting. How do you kind of prompt these people to tell their stories? Because I know it is not always comfortable to tell them. So what are some questions you can ask?
Yeah. So the question was, what are some questions I ask when prompting people about oral histories? So the first thing that I go through, like, I'll just walk through a braiding circle. The first thing I do is introduce myself. I tell them about the work. I tell them what the work will be used for. And then I start talking about hair. And I usually have like a list of questions. Like, I'll have a list of questions of like, do you remember a specific time your mother was braiding your hair? Do Do you remember a time that somebody you loved was brushing your hair? Do you remember a time somebody you hated was brushing your hair? And so I'll open up the circles with these questions, and that kind of gets the conversation going. I think it's important to, because I don't want to direct people into a story that I want. I want them to feel comfortable enough to tell the story that they want to tell. And so after the braiding circles, I'll go into like, not private, but like, it'll just be one-on-one, me and the person talking. And usually my question to them is, tell me a story about hair. And because I want them to be able to fill in the blanks for me. And I don't want to direct them to the story that I want them to tell. I want them to be open and tell me the story that they need to tell. And so there's little setup, but the little setup that I do is intentional. And also just making sure like the person is comfortable to share whatever they need to share. So, yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Okay, this is more of like a comment sort of thing. But I just kind of wanted to say that I never really considered hair as such a universal thing between humans, but that's something oftentimes I don't feel like I fit in as a transgender person. Mm-hmm. I don't have a lot of common cis people. So having hair in common is such a, it defies race, it defies gender and sexuality. And I think that's just a really interesting aspect of humanity that you decided to take as like part of your medium. And I'm kind of curious on like, how did you kind of like gravitate towards hair? Like what kind of sparked that interest?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you saying that because the question was what sparked my interest in hair. And thank you for your kind words about me using hair, because I feel like the reason I do use it is because it does transcend all of those places. Even for people that I remember were you at the braiding circle where the bald woman was at? You were there. So there was a bald woman there too. And they were talking about their hair. And I was like, this is amazing. Mm-hmm. To go back to your question about how I got interested in it, period, point blank, someone gave me a bag of hair. They were like, I think you could use this. And I was like, you know what? You're absolutely right. It was about like 5 or 6 years ago in grad school when I was trying to figure out a way to like imbue the body, but without like a picture of race, a picture of class, a picture of nothing. I wanted to just embody the human body. And so when someone gave me that bag of hair, I was like, this is it. It was like a gold mine to me. And so I've been investigating hair ever since that, because I think it does, as you just said, kind of like transcend all of those places, and kind of brings people into the work, even if you have hair or not, So, but thank you.
I've just been thinking about during our conversation, hair is so interesting as a medium because it's an extension of my body, right? But it doesn't necessarily have feeling on the end, but it certainly does have feeling on the root. It's this interesting, like extension of you and your body and almost like what you want to put out in the world. I'm wondering if you've thought about that, like the sensorial aspect of hair, literally in terms of like, I don't know, nerve endings or not feeling at certain points.
I don't think I've ever considered that. I know my daughter does when I brush her hair. She's very vocal about it. So I try to be as gentle as possible because I don't want any of those stories coming from the therapist. Like, did you brush her hair too hard? No, I didn't, I swear. But I don't think about that. And that's so funny that you bring that up because I was like brushing hair one day in my studio and I was being really rough with it. And somebody was like, they kind of asked me the same thing almost. They're like, do you imagine like this is attached to a human? And I was like, well, no, not right now. But now it does kind of like make me think of like the next part of my practice is like, do I go deeper? And I think about those physical connections because a lot of people tell me stories about being a child and brushing their hair and their mom just like, I know my mom did. Because I have that weird in-between hair. It's not curly, it's not straight, it's really weird, which is why it's up like this. But maybe that's the next part of my practice, but I don't think I think about that too much now. Maybe I should. I do when I'm brushing my kids' hair.
All right. I would like to remind Zoom people, if you have a question, you're welcome to put it in the chat, but I think we're almost ready to wrap up.
Yeah.
I'm going to double check the Zoom. Okay. Sorry, y'all. Awkward Zoom monitoring. Okay. I think we're about ready to wrap up. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you so much to our audience.
Thank you guys for listening.
Yeah, we so appreciate you. And I hope that you'll attend the braiding circle or the opening on May 11th of Veronica's work at the art gallery. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.